This video is brought to you by Nebula.
It's now been just over a year since Argentinian President Javier Milei took office, and, well, things are going pretty great for him. He successfully flipped both Argentina's trade and fiscal deficits, allowing Argentina to run consecutive primary surpluses for the first time in ages. Inflation has come down from its heady highs, allowing the central bank to finally cut interest rates, and hopefully paving the way for the V-shaped recovery that Milei has long promised. But perhaps most impressively, Milei's approval rating has actually gone up in the past few months, with the latest Morning Consult polling giving him an astonishing net approval rating of plus 37. So in this video, we're going to take another look at Milei's presidency and ask whether his apparent success could be replicated elsewhere. So let's start with a quick recap. As regular viewers probably already know, Milei came to power a year ago promising to take a proverbial chainsaw to the state in an attempt to balance the budget and bring macroeconomic stability. Within just a few weeks, he had abolished 10 of Argentina's 18 government ministries, halted the vast majority of public infrastructure projects, and dramatically cut fiscal transfers to provincial governments. He also devalued Argentina's currency, the peso, by 50%, and then implemented what's known as a crawling peg, whereby its value continued to fall by 2% each month, as part of an attempt to bring its official value closer to its market rate. This was both to simplify Argentina's currency regime, thereby facilitating more investment, and to force Argentinian households and businesses to import less. These policies had two immediate consequences. The first was a dramatic decrease in GDP, with Argentina's economy shrinking by about 3.5% this year, because cuts to government spending meant that Argentinian households had less cash to spend. This also triggered a dramatic increase in poverty, with the relative poverty rate rising from 40% to 53%. Second, there was a spike in inflation, thanks to the depreciation of the peso. Month-on-month inflation jumped from 12.8% in November 2023 to an all-time high of 25.5% in December 2023, Milei's first month in charge. For context, this would translate to a year-on-year rate, which is usually how inflation is measured, of about 1,400%. Now, this was unsurprising, and Milei did warn the electorate that his policies would entail some economic turmoil, but this really was quite an upheaval. While Milei's approval ratings stayed impressively high, with most pollsters putting him above 50%, a couple of months ago there was a sense that their patience was waning somewhat. His approval ratings were ticking down slightly, inflation was stubbornly high, and the recession was deepening. However, in the past few months, things have started looking up. Month-on-month inflation has fallen from a peak of 25% last December down to about 3% for the past few months. This is obviously high by international standards, but it's low by Argentinian standards. And, perhaps more importantly, it's lower than Argentina's average wage growth. Argentinian wages are currently growing by about 6%, which means, in real terms, that wages are growing at about 2 or 3% month on month, their fastest rate in quite some time. The relative poverty rate has also fallen from its recent peak, going from 53% in June to 49% in October. In November, low inflation allowed the central bank to lower its benchmark rate for the first time in nearly 6 months, from 40% to 35%. There are also some tentative signs that the economy is rebalancing towards investment and exports, as Milei had hoped. For context, GDP is usually defined as the sum of 4 things: domestic consumption, government spending, investment, and net exports, i.e. your exports minus your imports. Milei believes that Argentina's GDP involves too much consumption and government spending, and hopes that the coming recovery will be driven more by investment and exports. And, well, it looks like this is sort of happening. In the first 7 months of 2024, the latest period for which we have data, exports reached $45.4 billion, an increase of 14.8% on the same period last year, while imports totaled just $33.1 billion, a decrease of 25.9% year-on-year. In the aggregate, this means that Argentina ran a $12.3 billion trade surplus in this time, compared to a $5.2 billion trade deficit during the same period last year. Milei and the Argentinian government are confident that exports will continue to grow in the coming years, largely thanks to demand for commodities like lithium and copper, which are required for the energy transition and are relatively abundant in Argentina, but also because of shale. Argentina actually has one of the biggest shale oil and gas deposits in the world, called Vaca Muerta, in the Patagonian desert, but underinvestment and chronic mismanagement by the government and Argentina's big energy firms have left it largely undeveloped. Nonetheless, the deposit has already helped Argentina run an energy surplus. In other words, exporting more energy than it imports, for the first time since 2011. And exports will only grow if Milei can make more progress on Vaca Muerta's growing pipeline network. While the data on investment is a bit murkier, cash is flowing into Argentinian stocks, and Milei's government says it expects its reforms to attract up to $15 billion in investment next year. In other signs that investor confidence is improving, Argentinian bonds have doubled in value since Milei came to office, and in November, Argentina's credit rating was upgraded, although it's still 7 notches below investment grade. This has all been great news for Milei personally. According to the latest Morning Consult polling from last week, his net approval rating now sits at plus 37, up about 5 points from a few months ago and the second highest in the world after just India's Narendra Modi. Now, to be clear, this isn't to say that everything's going perfect. The economy is still in recession, after all. Nonetheless, the fact that in just a year, Milei has successfully flipped Argentina's fiscal and trade deficits, all while maintaining sky-high approval ratings, is undeniably impressive. Milei's apparent success in Argentina has sparked talk about whether his anti-state program could be replicated elsewhere. In many countries, there's a widespread sense, especially on the right, that the state is too bloated, and people like Elon Musk, who's currently heading up Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, have looked to Milei for inspiration. But there are at least 2 reasons that other politicians might struggle to replicate Milei's success. The first is that it's surprisingly complicated. Milei's international admirers often talk as if he just deleted a whole load of useless government departments, and that was it. But that's not quite true. Milei's cuts to government spending have been accompanied by a whole load of complicated technocratic reforms, especially around Argentina's currency and central bank, and it has been nowhere near as simple a process as is sometimes made out. And second, Argentinians knew what they were getting when they voted for Milei, who campaigned promising short-term economic pain for long-term gain, pitching himself as the necessary antidote to Argentina's chronic economic woes. It's hard to imagine a Western politician campaigning, let alone winning elections, on this sort of platform, and it's why someone like Trump, who came to power promising an immediate economic boom, will struggle to pull a Milei.
As you've probably noticed, the news cycle is particularly fast right now, with coups, elections and governmental gossip happening all over the world. In fact, with Trump heading into the White House, that chaos is only likely to get worse. If you're feeling a little lost and even a little depressed, then you might want to check out our series WTF USA, where we explain everything that's happened across the pond in the land of the free. Because while the election might be over, the number of WTF moments only looks likely to increase. Unlike some of our other more serious videos, the tone of WTF USA is more light-hearted and takes something of an irreverent look at what's going on. Regular viewers will be pleased to hear that the series has been extended due to overwhelmingly popular demand over on Nebula.
If these trends continue, hey!
Now, if you didn't know, Nebula is an independent creator-owned streaming platform that specialises in thoughtful content. Over there you can find creators like Wendover Productions, Real Life Law and Legal Eagle, with many of them releasing their very own original series on the platform. We're super proud of WTF USA, and we hope that with your support, we'll be able to make other interesting, weird and entertaining series with Nebula in the future. So signing up genuinely helps TLDR to grow and expand. You can also watch every normal TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in some instances before they land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, then click our link in the description to get 40% off. That's just $30 a year or $2.50 a month. We really hope you check out the series, and as always, thanks for your support.